Welcome back, Next Level listeners. Today, my guest is Charles Eisenstein. Charles is the author of several books, and most recently, Sacred Economics and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. This is a special day because Charles is here in my office, and we're recording this interview live. Today, we're going to talk about the space between stories. But before we jump into that topic, Charles, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
You are so very welcome. It's a great pleasure to have Charles here today. And I just wrapped up his book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And to say that it's thought-provoking would be a grandiose understatement because it is so chock full of awesomeness, and it's so well written and amazing. And we're going to get into that a little bit. But before we do, Charles, give our listeners an idea of how you arrived at writing about sacred economics and the teachings that you bring forth today.
So that question is actually related to the theme of the space between stories.
Love it.
Because like a lot of people, I mean, I'm older than you, but even when I was growing up, I had some sense that there's something wrong around here. And the life that was offered to me as a normal life or a good life or an appropriate life was not that attractive. But I didn't really have any sense of an alternative. All I knew was that there's something wrong here. I'm not supposed to be sitting in rows in a classroom learning bullshit, learning stuff that it's not even true, and it's not relevant. And who cares, what gift Lewis and Clark gave the whatever Indians in such and such a place, right. And who cares about Vasco da Gama and what did he discover and what did... there's this sense of void and a wrongness. And I've come to frame all of that as the old story that tells us who we are, what's real, how the world works, how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to be human, how to live a life. So I spent a long time rebelling against that. But there wasn't a ready-made alternative. And different people rebel in different ways. Some people rebel through destructive behavior, self-sabotage, addiction.
Yep.
Depression can be a kind of rebellion. Even ADD. You can force me to sit in this desk, but you can't force me to pay attention. Or being a slacker or being kind of half-hearted in your participation. And maybe some people listening can even today resonate with that. So I became interested in the origin of the wrongness. And that's a long story that led me to write my first book, The Ascent of Humanity, and then further on to Sacred Economics, because when you start asking what's wrong with the world, you pretty much bump into money every time.
Yes.
So I investigated that. How does the money system work? How could it work? What wants to happen in our economic world, in our economic relations or our economic lives? Is it true that we are fundamentally motivated to maximize rational self-interest? Or do we desire perhaps to contribute something to the world, to do something meaningful and beautiful? And what would an economic system look like if it were built around that? And so that would be an example of what I call the new story, which gives us different answers to those deep questions. Why am I here? How does the world work? How to live a good life? But right now, I can't say that I'm in the new story or a new story. Sometimes I am. Then I discover vestiges of the old.
Yes.
Powerful habits.
Yes.
Of scarcity, of control, of judgment. And then I've got something to work on, or there's something to work on me. This whole thing about being in the driver's seat and I'm going to work on my issues and work on my shadow and work on this and become a better person through my hard efforts, I think is a bit of a delusion. And it sets us up for failure. And then sometimes we go through a process beyond our control, an initiation.
Right. Meaning like something, like what some would equate to something happening to us or a circumstance. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a bit long-winded, but yeah, I guess my background is part of this transition. So I never got with the program, never really had a mainstream job, never had a high status in any institution.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people have left the old story and its structures behind. But there isn't very much of a new world to greet us.
Right.
So we have to explore, we have to forge our own path. And we often, not always, but often will not be, quote, successful according to the standards of the world that we've come from. And I think it's important not to see that lack of success as a failure.
So it's interesting because as I'm listening and as I'm seeing this picture played out, there are a lot of people in this transition, right? In the transition from the old economic system, old jobs. I mean, the old story of go to grade school, go to high school, go to college, and somehow you magically come out the chute the other side. You graduate college, you're like greeted with open arms into a world where there's plenty of jobs, doesn't really exist anymore. And the terrain of people creating their own way and making their own path and becoming authors, writers, speakers, expert in certain topics seems to be the new norm. It seems to be as if there's a lot of people coming forward and creating this story that you speak of. So can you speak to that for a moment, how you see the transition from the old job into the new way the workforce can operate? Maybe just bring some light to that topic.
A lot of times people have to leave the old job, or it could be the old relationship or the old way of living, without any new one to greet them, without knowing what they're going to do. Or maybe you think you know what you're going to do, but then when you leave it, that dries up, or you try to do that new thing and you don't like it, and you enter this place where you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
A place of helplessness and not knowing, and you let go. And that creates an empty space in which something genuinely new can arise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know what you had to let go of to start doing podcasts, but I doubt that you went to your college guidance counselor, career counselor, and they said, well, you could, have a podcast. Like, that didn't exist on their radar screen.
No, it didn't. Actually, my undergraduate was in pre-med and biology. And when my first transition from what I thought I was going to do to what I ended up doing was going from the path of, I'm going to go to medical school and be a neurosurgeon, to what do I do now? It was really just a clear no. Of this is not the path I'm really intended to take. And when I realized that, I remember where I was sitting in my bedroom at my desk at my parents' house. And it was one of those oh crap moments where I literally heard, as if it was a gong from the universe, no, like this isn't the way to go. And I had to fumble around for a bit and see signs and listen to things, which brought me to my next quote unquote career at that time, which was macrobiotic cooking and being a macrobiotic chef. So since then, it's been more of a, here's the next focus. Here's what I'm going to do for X period of time. And then after that concluded, being a tumbleweed in the wind, if you will, finding the next thing, which led me to the next thing and then the next thing. And this is an adjunct to pretty much all of that, and bringing a lot of it together. And then bringing folks like you into the conversation to really just build this out, because we're all finding our way. We're all discovering what this looks like. And I mean, we can all have ideas and clarifying the picture of what it's going to look like. And I think we're defining it as we go. Like, knowing where we're going seems to be synonymous with the stories of the past.
Right. If there's already a map for it, then it's a place that has already been discovered and explored.
Yeah.
David Whyte, the poet David Whyte, says, any path that already exists is the wrong path because it was made by somebody else.
Right. it's an uncertain place. You know, it's one of those things that the space between stories seems, I know for me, is really uncomfortable a lot of times. The idea of comfort, of like, oh, this is nice, of even being able to relax sometimes can be tough.
You're supposed to know what you're doing. You're supposed to have a plan. You're supposed to get your act together. You're not supposed to stay, between jobs for very long. We certainly don't allow months or years. And sometimes it takes months or years.
Mm-hmm. So how do we navigate that space between stories? Give us an idea of your, I guess you could say, strategy or your day-to-day, what that looks like of navigating the space.
It's almost the wrong question.
Feel free to reframe it. That'd be great.
Yeah. No, I can answer the question, but there's something like this craving for a map or for a strategy or here's what to do.
Well said. Yeah.
Because I think the essence of it is that you don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I could say, trust the process of life in this space. But that's not actually an instruction that you can carry out through an effort of will.
Right.
Trust, surrender, letting go. I find that when I try to carry this out willfully, because I'm supposed to, because someone said, okay, you got to let go, what I end up with is fake letting go. In my experience, real surrender happens when I can't hold on anymore. Something larger than me forces me to let go. And maybe there is a moment where I feel like I'm making a choice to let go, but it's taken a lot to bring me to that moment. Therefore, I can't offer it as a prescription. But nonetheless, speaking it out loud is still useful. Somehow that idea of I could just let go, it worms its way into our psyche. And perhaps when that moment comes, it's infiltrated us enough that we're able and willing to let go at that moment. I don't know. It's mysterious. But just that whole way of operating where you find a set of instructions, a set of principles for life. And now I have something to follow. Now I have something to rest on. In subtle ways, very often those principles are built from the filaments of the old story. And, take all this with a grain of salt. It's not like a one-time thing where you go through the space between stories and then you're good to go for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Especially as things accelerate, it seems as if, I know for me, I'm being catapulted into new. It's almost as if there's a space between stories. Within that space, there's another space. It's like the space within the spaces. And even in those micro moments, there's an opportunity to, really trusting the process. I know a lot of these catchphrases that can seem new agey or whatever they are, there's a lot of weight in them. And I think our conscious mind wants to hear the tactic, hear the strategy, hear the bullet point list, hear the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we can grasp onto something and say, oh, that's it, when that's literally the antithesis of trusting.
Right. Although there are territories in this terrain that are familiar to people who have gone through it. For example, there's the time of looking over your shoulder and regretting that you left the old world behind. Not everybody goes through that particular area, but many people do. And that is not necessarily something to just get over. Like that could be a really important part of the grieving process for what's lost, an important part of the integration process. There's the time of trying lots of different things, even as you know that none of them are it, but you try them anyway. There's the time of maybe actually returning to the old story and clinging onto it as tightly as you can. There's the time of utter stillness, of being totally in the moment and finding any kind of strategizing or plan making repellent. There's the time of getting excited about a new plan, and then tomorrow dropping it, and then doing it again, and getting excited about one thing after another, and none of them are it. All of these, they're not wrong. There's the time, though, of feeling like you've been doing it totally wrong your whole life, and really sinking your teeth into that feeling. So the process kind of takes us through it. And it has its own intelligence. And it, my mind kind of quails at the idea that there's not a way for me to do it right.
Yeah.
That it's not up to me. Because that's such a vulnerable place. We want to be in charge of things. We want to have a handle on it. We don't want to be surrendered to something that who knows where it'll take you. You could die.
Right.
You could.
And do you think that like men are more susceptible to this wanting to control than women are, or do you see it synonymous between?
Yeah, I think that there might even be a biological aspect to that. And there's certainly a cultural aspect to it, in a patriarchal society. But women are in certain obvious ways much more surrendered to biological rhythms than men are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within the, within the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, there's I kind of extracted a few quotes, a few highlights from specific chapters that I would love to dive in here. So in chapter 3 of Interbeingness, you talked about the story of interbeing in which no action is insignificant. Mm-hmm. Can you dive into that a little bit? Just unpack that?
Sure. So in what I call the old story, which is kind of a Newtonian worldview, your impact on the world depends on how much power or how much force you can exert. If you have lots of money, if you have a big army under your command, if you're the president of the United States, if you have a big platform, if you have 100,000 subscribers rather than 10,000, then you're going to have a 10 times bigger impact.
Right.
So if you want to be a success in the world, whether it's in conventional terms or even in terms of making a big impact, making a big change, then you've got to be big, you've got to be strong, you've got to be powerful, you've got to have a lot of something, a lot of money, a lot of audience, something like that. And that is all based on a worldview or a theory of change that says change happens when you exert a force on a mass. Mm-hmm. And of course, your personal force is limited, but if you can organize lots of people and compel lots of people to do your bidding, then you have a magnified amount of force.
Yes.
Right. Well, that way of thinking devalues certain actions, certain ways of being that in our hearts we feel are really important and impactful, but that do not result in measurable outcomes on a big scale. So what if you spend, one example might be the person who spends, the lawyer maybe, who spends 5 or 10 years trying to free somebody from death row who has been wrongfully convicted, or the activist who spends 10 years trying to free a single orca from captivity. And in the big picture, you think, well, okay, that's very nice, but what's freeing one man going to do in the context of climate change, in the context of all these global injustices, world hunger, mass incarceration? This person should be working on a bigger level than just this one tiny little thing. What about the woman who spends 10 years taking care of her grandmother, where all her friends are going out, having a good time, developing their careers, working for Greenpeace, doing big things, and she's just taking care of one old lady who's going to die anyway, and no one will even know about it. So our minds say, well, that's very admirable, but she's really not having a big impact on the world, not compared to, Vandana Shiva, or not compared to Bill McKibben, or not compared to somebody who's got a loud voice. However, there is another logic that validates those small, private, invisible acts that feel so important. Like it feels like the most important thing in the world, maybe to be at your grandmother's deathbed as she's dying. And you would sacrifice almost anything to be there if you were close to her.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have a friend in need, in desperate need, you'll put down anything.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's the most important thing in the world. And you feel that if you didn't do that, you would be...